Have you ever wondered what would happen if the most evil wizard from one universe suddenly appeared in an even darker one? Vecna, the ancient lich lord with a rotting body and terrible power, opened his one glowing eye. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. The magical energy around him felt different, darker, and infinitely more dangerous than anything he had ever experienced. For thousands of years, Vecna had been a master of death and secrets in his own world. He had conquered kingdoms, destroyed gods, and made entire civilizations kneel before him. But now, standing in this new place, even he felt a cold shiver run through his skeletal fingers. Where is he? The sky above was not blue or filled with stars like normal skies. Instead, it was a twisted mixture of purple, red, and black clouds that seemed to scream silently. Lightning cracked across the horizon, but it wasn't normal lightning. This energy was alive, hungry, and evil. Vecna looked down at the ground beneath his feet. The dirt was gray and dead, covered with bones and broken weapons from battles that must have happened recently. Smoke rose from distant fires, and the smell of burning metal and flesh filled the air. Can you imagine landing in a place where even the ground beneath your feet tells stories of endless war? Vecna's magical senses, sharper than any humans could ever be, began picking up information. This universe was soaked in violence and hatred. Everywhere he looked with his all-seeing eye, he witnessed death and destruction on a scale he had never imagined possible. Massive metal creatures, hundreds of feet tall, walked across battlefields, crushing everything in their path. These weren't golems or construct from his world. These were war machines beyond anything he had ever created. In the distance, Vecna saw a spaceship crash into a mountain. The explosion was so big it turned the entire mountain into dust and fire. From the wreckage, armored soldiers emerged, but they weren't running away. They were charging toward their enemies, screaming battle cries even as they died. These warriors wore thick armor painted in bright colors with strange symbols. Some had chains words, weapons with rotating teeth that could cut through anything. Others carried guns that shot explosive bullets the size of a man's fist. Would you keep fighting if you knew you would probably die in the next few minutes? Vecna watched as these soldiers, called Space Marines, he would later learn, fought against a horde of green-skinned monsters. These creatures were called orcs, and they loved fighting more than anything else in existence. They laughed as they died, happy to be in battle. The orcs crashed into the Space Marines with crude axes and guns that looked like they were built from junk. But somehow, these ridiculous weapons worked, blowing massive holes in the Space Marines' armor. This was madness. Pure, glorious madness. But Vecna was no fool. He had survived for millennia by being careful, cunning, and always staying 10 steps ahead of his enemies. He needed to understand this new universe before revealing himself. Using his powerful magic, Vecna made himself invisible and began to explore. He floated through the air like a ghost, watching and learning. As he traveled, he discovered cities the size of continents. Buildings reached so high into the sky that their tops disappeared into the clouds. But these weren't beautiful cities. They were dark, industrial nightmares. Factories pumped out black smoke 24 hours a day. Millions of humans worked in these factories, building weapons and war machines. The workers looked tired, hungry, and hopeless, but they kept working because stopping meant death. Have you ever felt like you were just a small part of something much bigger and darker than yourself? Vecna saw statues everywhere. Massive golden statues of a man in armor, sitting on a throne. The humans bowed before these statues, praying and crying. They called him the God Emperor. Even Vecna, who had seen and battled gods before, felt something strange when looking at these statues. There was real power behind them, real divine energy. This emperor, whoever he was, had somehow convinced billions, no, trillions, of humans that he was their god and protector. Then Vecna felt it, a presence in the warp, the nightmare dimension that existed alongside normal reality in this universe. Actually, not one presence, 4 massive, terrible presences. They were looking at him, studying him, The Chaos Gods had noticed the new arrival in their galaxy. Vecna felt their attention like burning eyes on his back. Khorne, the Blood God, saw Vecna as a potential warrior or enemy. Nurgle, the Plague Father, wondered if Vecna's undead body would accept his diseases. Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure and Pain, was curious about what suffering could be inflicted on a being already dead. And Tsench, the Changer of Ways, saw Vecna as a new piece on his infinite chessboard. What would you do if, for evil gods, suddenly became interested in you? For the first time in thousands of years, Vecna felt something close to fear. Not terror, not panic, but a healthy respect for the danger he was in. These chaos gods were not like the deities from his home universe. They were older, stronger, and fed on the emotions of every living thing in the galaxy. War, disease, excess, and hope, all of it made them more powerful. Vecna landed on an abandoned building and looked out at the war-torn landscape. He saw a future of endless possibilities and terrible dangers. This Warhammer 40K universe was darker than anything he had ever known. But Vecna was the master of secrets, the undying king, the Whispered One. He had toppled gods before. He had rewritten reality itself. A terrible smile crossed his skeletal face. Yes, this universe was dangerous. Yes, these gods and emperors and armies were powerful. But Vecna had not survived this long by giving up when things got difficult. He would learn. He would adapt. He would conquer. The grim darkness of the far future had just met its newest and perhaps most dangerous player. And Vecna was ready to play the game. What would you do if you discovered someone who rules over 1 million worlds, but can't even move from his chair? Vecna needed answers. He had been in this brutal universe for only a short time, but everywhere he looked, he saw the same symbols, the same statues, and heard the same names spoken with fear and devotion. The God Emperor of mankind. If Vecna wanted to understand this galaxy and find a way to control it, he needed to learn everything about this mysterious ruler. Using his all-seeing eye, Vecna began searching for the source of the Emperor's power. His magical vision traveled across space itself, jumping from planet to planet, following the psychic threads that connected every human in the Imperium. These threads were like golden chains that stretched across the darkness of space, all leading back to one single point. Holy Terra, the throne world of humanity. This was Earth, the original home of the human race, but it was nothing like Vecna remembered Earth being described in ancient texts from his own universe. Terra was covered entirely in cities. There were no forests, no oceans, no natural landscapes left, just endless metal buildings, cathedrals the size of mountains, and billions upon billions of people. The entire planet was one massive fortress. Space stations orbited overhead, armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Giant defense platforms floated in space, their guns always pointing outward, ready to destroy any threat that came close. Can you imagine living on a planet where every single inch is covered in buildings and weapons? Vecna's vision dove deeper, penetrating through the layers of Terra's defenses. He passed through force fields that would have destroyed normal beings. He slipped past automated defense systems and psychic wards that had been built over 10,000 years. Finally, he reached the heart of Terra, the Imperial Palace. The palace was beyond massive. It covered thousands of square miles and contained millions of rooms. Armies of guards patrolled its halls day and night. The walls were covered in gold, decorated with images of the Emperor's greatest victories. Vecna saw rooms filled with ancient weapons, libraries containing the knowledge of countless civilizations, and chambers where important decisions about the fate of the galaxy were made every single day. But Vecna wasn't interested in any of those things. He wanted to see the Emperor himself. At the very center of the palace, buried deep underground in a chamber protected by the most powerful warriors humanity had ever created, Vecna finally found him. The Golden Throne. Would you sacrifice everything to save your species, even if it meant suffering forever? The God Emperor sat on a massive golden throne that hummed with incredible power. Thousands of cables and tubes connected to his body, feeding him the souls of psychic humans every single day just to keep him alive. The Emperor's body was ancient, withered, and clearly in terrible pain. His face was skeletal, his skin like old leather stretched over bones. But his eyes still burned with an inner fire that made even Vecna pause. This was no ordinary being. Vecna had expected to find a powerful wizard or perhaps a skilled politician who had tricked humanity into worshipping him. Instead, he found something far more impressive and far more dangerous. The Emperor was a perpetual, an immortal who had walked among humanity for over 40,000 years. He had been a king, a scientist, a warrior, and a prophet. He had guided human civilization from the shadows, always pushing them forward, always protecting them from threats they didn't even know existed. 10,000 years ago, the Emperor had been betrayed by his own son during something called the Horus Heresy. A terrible civil war had nearly destroyed humanity. The Emperor had fought his most beloved son, Horus, in single combat and won, but the battle had left him mortally wounded. Since that day, he had been trapped on the Golden Throne, unable to move, unable to speak, barely able to think clearly. But his power? His power was greater than ever. Have you ever wondered how someone could be so broken yet still so strong? Vecna watched in fascination as the Emperor's psychic energy flowed outward from Terra. The Emperor's mind, even while trapped and suffering, acted as a lighthouse for all of humanity. Ships traveling through space used his psychic light to navigate the dangerous warp, the nightmare dimension where demons lived. Without the Emperor's light, called the Astronomican, humanity's empire would collapse in days. Trillions of humans would be stranded on distant planets, cut off from help, easy prey for aliens and chaos. The Emperor was also holding back the forces of chaos itself. His willpower, his sheer determination to protect humanity, created a barrier that kept the worst demons from pouring into the material universe. Vecna could see the constant battle happening in the warp. The Emperor fought against the four chaos gods every single moment of every single day, never resting, never stopping for 10,000 years. Vecna felt something he rarely experienced: respect. This Emperor had turned himself into a living sacrifice to save his people. He endured endless agony, trapped in a body that should have died millennia ago, fighting battles that no one else could see or understand. The humans who worshipped him had no idea how much their god truly suffered for them. But Vecna also saw weakness. The Emperor couldn't move. He couldn't speak to give orders. He couldn't adapt to new threats. The Imperium that supposedly served him had become corrupt and inefficient. The humans had turned his teachings into rigid dogma. They burned anyone who questioned their beliefs. They feared science and progress, calling it heresy. The Emperor had wanted to free humanity from superstition, but now they worshipped him as a god, the very thing he had fought against. What if the person meant to save everyone became the reason they couldn't save themselves? Vecna circled the Golden Throne chamber invisibly, studying every detail. He saw the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guards. These golden-armored warriors were the greatest soldiers humanity could create. Each one was stronger, faster, and more skilled than even the legendary Space Marines. They stood absolutely still, watching for any threat, ready to kill anyone who came too close to their master. There were 10,000 of them in the palace, and each one would gladly die to protect the Emperor. Vecna also noticed the technology keeping the Emperor alive. The Golden Throne was breaking down. Despite the best efforts of the tech priests who maintained it, the ancient machine was failing. Pieces that broke couldn't be replaced because humanity had forgotten how to build them. The Mechanicus, the religious order that controlled all technology in the Imperium, treated machines like gods rather than tools. They prayed to equipment instead of understanding it. The Emperor was dying. Slowly, perhaps, but definitely dying. A terrible idea began forming in Vecna's mind. What if he didn't need to fight the Emperor? What if he could replace him? Vecna was immortal, powerful, and cunning. He understood both magic and the manipulation of masses. If the Emperor finally died, the Imperium would fall into chaos. Billions would die. The Chaos Gods would win. But what if Vecna took the Emperor's place before that happened? What if he sat on the golden throne and became the new god of humanity? The thought was intoxicating. Trillions of humans worshipping him. Armies of space marines following his orders. The entire galaxy bowing before the Archlich Vecna. Would you take the chance to become a god, even if it meant eternal suffering? But Vecna was patient. He had waited thousands of years before. He could wait longer. First, he needed to understand this universe better. He needed allies, resources, and a plan. The Emperor had ruled for 40,000 years and built an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds. Vecna wouldn't destroy that in a day. As Vecna prepared to leave, the Emperor's eyes suddenly moved. Just slightly, just for a moment, but they moved. They looked directly at where Vecna was standing invisible. The Emperor knew he was there. A voice, ancient and powerful beyond measure, whispered in Vecna's mind, "Leave." Vecna fled. For the first time in millennia, the Master of Secrets ran away. Because he understood now. The Emperor was trapped, yes. The Emperor was dying, yes. But the Emperor was still dangerous enough to destroy Vecna with a thought if he chose to. As Vecna escaped from Terra, his ambition only grew stronger. Yes, the Emperor was powerful, but power could be stolen. Secrets could be learned. Gods could be killed. Vecna had found his greatest challenge yet, and he was going to win. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you were completely alone? Vecna floated in the empty darkness of space, far from any planet or star. He needed time to think, to plan his next move. The encounter with the God Emperor had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. But Vecna was nothing if not adaptable. He had faced gods before. He had killed gods before. This would be no different, or so he thought. The warp suddenly rippled around him like water disturbed by a massive stone. Reality itself began to crack and tear. Colors that shouldn't exist bled through the holes in space. Vecna felt the temperature drop to absolute zero, then spike to the heat of a sun, then drop again. Time moved backward, then forward, then sideways in directions that made no sense. And through it all, he heard laughter. For different kinds of laughter. The first laugh was deep and angry, like a volcano about to explode. The second was wet and bubbly, like someone drowning happily. The third was high and musical, beautiful yet terrifying. The fourth was the worst. It sounded like 1,000 voices all laughing at a joke only they understood. A joke that involved your pain and suffering. The Chaos Gods had come to introduce themselves. What would you do if the embodiments of war, disease, pleasure, and change all decided to pay you a visit at once? The space around Vecna split open, and he saw the warp in all its horrible glory. The Imperium, the sea of souls, the realm of chaos. It had many names, but they all described the same nightmare dimension. This wasn't like the simple afterlife planes Vecna knew from his own universe. The warp was alive, constantly changing, reflecting the emotions and thoughts of every living thing in the galaxy. And it was utterly insane. Rivers of blood flowed upward. Mountains made of screaming faces rose and fell. Gardens of diseased flowers bloomed and rotted in seconds. Palaces of impossible beauty contained tortures beyond imagination. And ruling over all of this were the four. Khorne appeared first, or at least his presence did. Vecna saw a massive brass throne sitting on a mountain of skulls that reached into infinity. Rivers of blood flowed from the mountain, and the sound of eternal battle echoed across the landscape. Warriors fought and died, and were reborn just to fight again forever. Khorne himself was a towering figure of muscle and rage, covered in armor made from the bones of his enemies. He held an axe so large it could split planets. The blood god's voice boomed like thunder. "A new warrior enters my realm. Will you fight, little dead thing? Will you add your skull to my throne?" Can you imagine a god whose only desire is endless war and bloodshed? Before Vecna could answer, everything changed. The landscape shifted, and suddenly he stood in a garden of incredible rot and decay. Everything here was dying, but dying slowly, happily, accepting death as a natural part of existence. Flies the size of horses buzzed around, and the smell of sweet corruption filled the air. Plants grew and rotted simultaneously, creating new life from death in an eternal cycle. Nurgle emerged from a pool of bubbling slime, his massive body bloated and covered in sores that leaked every disease imaginable. But his face wore a genuine smile, like a grandfather looking at his beloved grandchildren. Smaller demons danced around him, spreading plagues with joy and laughter. "Welcome, young one," Nurgle said in a voice that sounded kind despite everything. "Why do you fear death when death is merely another stage of existence? I can give you such wonderful gifts. Diseases that would make your enemies immortal in their suffering. Come, join my garden. Embrace decay. Would you accept immortality if it meant rotting forever but never dying?" The garden melted away, replaced by a palace of mirrors and silk, where every surface reflected your deepest desires and darkest secrets. Music played from everywhere and nowhere, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Demons danced through the halls, their forms constantly shifting between male and female, beautiful and hideous, pleasure and pain merged into one. Slaanesh appeared as a being of impossible beauty, too perfect to look at directly. The Prince of Pleasure smiled with lips that promised every sensation imaginable. "How boring you must be, little lich. Dead flesh, no pleasures of the body, no sensation at all. But I could give you feeling again, pain and pleasure beyond anything you experienced when alive. Wouldn't you like to feel again?" The palace shifted one more time, and Vecna found himself in a library that stretched forever in all directions. Books floated through the air, their pages constantly rewriting themselves. Staircases led up and down and sideways, defying all laws of physics. At the center sat a massive bird-like creature with feathers that changed color with each second. Tzeentch, the architect of fate. But Tzeentch didn't speak. Instead, 9 different versions of Tzeentch appeared, each one talking at the same time. "We see your past, your present, 9 different futures. The Master of Secrets meets the God of Secrets. You seek knowledge, we are knowledge. You manipulate fate, we are fate. You scheme and plot, we invented scheming and plotting. Join us, oppose us, it matters not. Every choice you make serves our purposes. Or does it? Come, little whispered one, let us whisper together. Have you ever met someone who knew everything you were going to do before you did it?" Vecna gathered his composure. He was standing before 4 of the most powerful entities in this entire universe, beings that literally fed on the emotions of trillions of souls. They could destroy him with a thought. But Vecna had not survived millennia by showing weakness to those stronger than himself. "I serve no gods," Vecna said, his voice cold and clear. "I have killed gods. I have become a god. I will not kneel to you." The 4 chaos gods laughed again. Not angry laughter, but amused laughter, like adults watching a child claim they would fight a dragon. Khorne's voice rumbled. "You cannot kill us, little thing. We are eternal. We are war itself." Nurgle chuckled wetly. "We are not beings you can kill. We are concepts given form. While mortals exist, we exist." Slaanesh sang. "Kill us? You would need to destroy every emotion in the galaxy. Good luck with that, darling." Tzeentch's 9 voices spoke as one. "Besides, why would we fight when we can simply wait? Everything you do will serve one of us eventually. War feeds Khorne. Your plots feed me. The suffering you cause feeds Nurgle. The ambition and pride you feel feed Slaanesh. You're already our servant. You just don't know it yet." The words hit Vecna like a physical blow because they were true. In his own universe, Vecna's actions had been his own. But here in Warhammer 40K, where the Chaos Gods drew power from every action, every thought, every emotion, how could he do anything without feeding them? What would you do if you realized that even your rebellion against gods made those gods stronger? Then the Chaos Gods showed him their power, not to hurt him, but to test him. Demons poured through the tears in reality. Bloodletters, demons of Khorne with burning swords. Plague bearers, carriers of Nurgle's diseases. Demonettes, beautiful horrors of Slaanesh. Horrors of Tsench, creatures made of living magic. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, all charging at Vecna. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Vecna unleashed his full power. His hand, the hand of Vecna, glowed with dark energy. His eye, the eye of Vecna, saw every weakness in his enemies. Spells that had destroyed armies in his home universe flew from his skeletal fingers. Power word kill dropped demons by the dozen. Disintegrate turned them to dust. Time stop froze them in place. Meteor swarm crashed down from above. But for every demon Vecna destroyed, two more appeared. They weren't trying to kill him. They were testing him, measuring his strength, learning his abilities. And Vecna realized something terrifying. The Chaos Gods were playing with him. This wasn't even a fraction of their true power. After what felt like hours but might have been seconds, time worked strangely in the warp. The demons stopped coming. The Chaos Gods' attention faded, like predators losing interest in prey that wasn't entertaining enough. Tsench's final words echoed in Vecna's mind. "We'll be watching your schemes, little archlich. You try to make them interesting. How does it feel knowing that gods consider you nothing more than entertainment?" Vecna found himself back in normal space, floating among the stars. His magical reserves were drained more than they had been in centuries. His undead body, which felt no fatigue, somehow felt tired. But most importantly, Vecna had learned a crucial lesson. The Chaos Gods were beyond him. For now, they were too powerful, too fundamental to this universe's existence. He couldn't fight them directly, but Vecna was a master of indirect approaches. If he couldn't destroy them, perhaps he could use them, play them against each other. The four Chaos Gods hated each other almost as much as they hated everything else. Khorne despised Slaanesh. Nurgle opposed Tsench. They worked together rarely and reluctantly. A plan began forming in Vecna's ancient mind. The Chaos Gods thought they were using him. What if he used them instead? What if he became a piece on Tsench's game board that played by its own rules? But first, he needed power. Real power. The kind that would make even the Chaos Gods think twice about dismissing him. And Vecna knew exactly where to find it. Deep beneath the surface of dead worlds, an ancient race slept. A race that had once fought the gods themselves and won. The Necrons. It was time to wake them up. What if you discovered a civilization so advanced that they killed their own gods and turned themselves into immortal machines? Vecna traveled through the cold void of space, his mind racing with new plans. The encounter with the Chaos Gods had taught him a valuable lesson. In this universe, raw magical power alone wouldn't be enough. He needed something more, something the Chaos Gods couldn't corrupt or control. He needed technology so advanced it looked like magic. He needed the secrets of the Necrons. Using his all-seeing eye, Vecna searched the galaxy for Necron tomb worlds. These were planets where the ancient machines slept, waiting for the right time to wake up and reclaim the galaxy they once ruled. Most of these tombs were hidden, protected by technology that made them invisible to normal detection. But Vecna's eye could see through illusions and barriers that had stood for millions of years. Finally, he found one. A dead planet on the edge of the galaxy, far from any Imperial world or major conflict. The planet's surface was gray and lifeless, covered in dust that hadn't been disturbed in eons. There were no plants, no animals, no water, just endless emptiness. But beneath the surface, Vecna's magical senses detected something incredible. A vast underground complex, bigger than any city, filled with machinery that still hummed with power after 60 million years. Have you ever wondered what would be like to explore a tomb filled with sleeping monsters? Vecna descended to the planet's surface like a dark shadow. The moment his feet touched the ground, defensive systems activated. Automated guns rose from hidden compartments in the rocks, their barrels glowing with green energy. They fired beams of pure force that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level. But Vecna was ready. He cast a spell of reflection, sending the deadly beams back at the guns, destroying them with their own weapons. More defenses appeared, scarab-like machines, each the size of a dog, swarmed out of holes in the ground. These weren't ordinary robots. They were programmed with millions of years of combat experience and armed with tools that could break down any material, even magical barriers. They surrounded Vecna, their metal legs clicking against the stone in a creepy rhythm. Vecna raised the hand of Vecna and spoke words of power in a language older than human civilization. Dark energy exploded outward, shorting out the scarab systems. They fell to the ground, twitching and sparking. But Vecna knew this was just the beginning. The real defenses were deeper underground. He found an entrance, a massive metal door carved with alien symbols that hurt to look at. The symbols seemed to shift and change, creating patterns that normal minds couldn't process without going insane. But Vecna's mind was far from normal. He studied the symbols, recognizing them as a mathematical lock. The Necrons didn't use simple passwords. They used equations so complex that solving them required understanding physics at a level most races would never achieve. Vecna smiled his skeletal smile. Mathematics was just another form of magic, and he was a master of both. Would you be brave enough to solve a puzzle that could kill you if you got it wrong? His bony fingers traced patterns in the air, solving equations that had no right to exist. Space folded in on itself. Time ran backward for a moment. The symbols on the door glowed bright green, then faded. With a deep grinding sound that echoed across the empty planet, the massive door began to open. Beyond the door stretched a corridor of black metal, polished so smooth it reflected like a mirror. Green lights ran along the ceiling, providing the only illumination. The air inside was perfectly still, perfectly preserved, as if time itself had stopped when the Necrons went to sleep. Vecna's footsteps made no sound as he walked down the corridor, using his magic to float just above the floor. The corridor led to a vast chamber, and what Vecna saw there made even his ancient heart, or what remained of it, beat faster with excitement. Thousands of Necron warriors stood in perfect rows, completely motionless. Each one was a skeletal robot, made of living metal that could repair itself. Their eye sockets glowed with a faint green light, dormant but not dead. In their hands they held Gauss weapons, rifles that could strip the atoms from targets' body layer by layer. Even sleeping, they looked terrifying. But Vecna wasn't interested in the warriors. He was looking for something much more valuable: the tomb's data archives. Every Necron tomb world contained libraries of information. 60 million years of knowledge about technology, warfare, and the secrets of the universe itself. The Necrons had mastered science to a degree that seemed like pure magic. They could control time. They could create pocket dimensions. They had weapons that could destroy stars and shields that could withstand supernova explosions. Can you imagine holding all the knowledge of a civilization that ruled the galaxy before humans even existed? Vecna found the archive chamber deep within the tomb. It was a room filled with crystalline structures that hummed with stored data. Each crystal contained more information than all the libraries of ancient Rome combined. Vecna reached out with his magic, trying to interface with the alien technology. It resisted him at first. The Necron data storage systems were designed to be accessed only by Necron minds, mechanical consciousness that thought in ways completely different from organic beings. But Vecna was patient and clever. He had spent thousands of years studying how minds worked, both living and dead. Slowly, carefully, he began to understand the patterns. The crystals began to glow brighter, responding to his presence. Information flooded into Vecna's mind. Blueprints for weapons, specifications for faster-than-light travel that didn't require the dangerous warp, the location of other, larger tomb worlds, the history of the Necron race before they became machines. And then he found something truly incredible: information about the Tan, the star gods. The Tan were beings of living energy that fed on stars themselves. Millions of years ago, the Necroner had made a terrible deal with them. The Tan promised to give the Necronter immortality and power to defeat their enemies, the ancient Eldar. But the price was horrifying. The Necroner had to give up their flesh and blood bodies and transfer their consciousness into metal shells. They became the Necrons, immortal but soulless. Would you give up your humanity to live forever? The Tan had tricked them. The process of transformation had stripped away much of what made the Necroner who they were. Their emotions faded. Their creativity diminished. They became weapons, slaves to the Tan's will. For millions of years, the Necrons served their star god masters, conquering the galaxy. But then the Necrons rebelled. In a war called the War in Heaven, they turned their weapons on the Tan themselves. Using technology they had developed in secret, the Necrons shattered the star gods, breaking them into smaller fragments and imprisoning these fragments in special containers. The Tan, who thought themselves unkillable, learned that even gods could be destroyed if you had the right tools. Vecna's mind raced with possibilities. The Necrons had killed gods. Not metaphorical gods or powerful beings who called themselves gods, but actual deities with power over reality itself. And somewhere in this tomb world, there might be a fragment of a Tan, imprisoned and waiting. He had to find it. Deeper into the tomb Vecna went, past more sleeping warriors, past war machines the size of buildings, past weapons he didn't even have names for. Finally, he reached the central chamber, and there, floating in a field of green energy, was a prison unlike anything Vecna had ever seen. Inside the prison was a shard of a Tan, a fragment of a star god. It looked like living metal shaped into a vaguely humanoid form, but its body constantly shifted, never quite solid. Even imprisoned and diminished, the Tan radiated power. It was aware, Vecna could tell. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, focused on him with terrible intelligence. What would you say to a god trapped in a cage? Release me, the Tan whispered directly into Vecna's mind. Its voice sounded like solar flares and dying stars. Release me, and I will give you power beyond your imagination. The secrets of creation itself. The ability to reshape reality. Vecna laughed, a dry, hollow sound. I'm not that foolish, Star God. I know what you are. I've read the records. You enslaved the Necrons and would do the same to me. The Tan's expression, if a being of living metal could have expressions, showed something like respect. You're smarter than most organic things, but you're also desperate. You want to defeat the Chaos Gods. You want to conquer this galaxy. You cannot do either with magic alone. I don't need you for that, Vecna replied. I need your knowledge, and I'll take it whether you give it willingly or not. The Tan laughed, and the sound made the entire chamber shake. Try a dead thing. My mind is beyond your comprehension. Touch it, and you'll go mad. Have you ever wanted something so badly you'd risk losing yourself to get it? Vecna knew the Tan was right. Trying to read a god's mind directly would destroy him. But Vecna hadn't survived this long by facing challenges head-on when indirect methods worked better. Instead of trying to read the Tan's mind, he would study how the Necrons had imprisoned it. If he could understand the technology of the prison, he could potentially control it, maybe even use it against the Chaos God someday. For hours, or maybe days, time felt strange in the tomb. Vecna studied the prison. He learned how the Necrons had bent the laws of physics to contain a being of pure energy. He discovered that the prison didn't just hold the Tan physically, but also suppressed its ability to manipulate reality. The technology was incredibly advanced, far beyond anything the Imperium of man could create. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the tomb. Vecna had stayed too long. The tomb's systems had detected his presence and were waking the Guardians. He heard the sound of metal feet marching in perfect unison. The Necron warriors were activating. Time to leave. But Vecna was not leaving empty-handed. Using magic combined with what he'd learned from the Necron technology, he created a copy of the data crystals, storing them in a pocket dimension only he could access. He now possessed knowledge that could change everything. As Necron warriors poured into the chamber, their Gauss weapons charging with deadly green energy, Vecna cast a teleportation spell and vanished. Behind him, the Tan's laughter echoed through the tomb. The Star God knew something Vecna didn't, and it found that fact amusing. Vecna reappeared in space, far from the tomb world. He had what he needed, knowledge of technology that could potentially rival or even surpass the Chaos God's power. But he had also made enemies. The Necrons would be looking for him now. Their tomb world had been violated, their secrets stolen. Let them look, Vecna thought. He was already planning his next move. The Necrons were powerful, yes, but they were also fractured. Different dynasties fought each other for control. Different overlords had different goals. Like the Chaos Gods, they could be played against each other. But first, Vecna needed allies in this dark galaxy. And he knew exactly who would appreciate his particular talents for cruelty and manipulation. The Dark Eldar were waiting. What if there was a race so cruel that they tortured others not for information or revenge, but simply because they enjoyed it? Vecna floated in the void between dimensions, studying the stolen Necron data he had acquired. Among the vast archives of information, he found references to a mysterious network called the Webway, ancient tunnels through space built by the Old Ones billions of years ago. These passages allowed instant travel anywhere in the galaxy without touching the dangerous warp. The Eldar had inherited these tunnels when the Old Ones disappeared, and they still used them. But there was one group of Eldar who interested Vecna more than the others, the Drukhari, also called the Dark Eldar. According to the Necron records, these beings had split from their cousins thousands of years ago when the Eldar Empire fell. While the Craftworld Eldar tried to control their darker emotions, the Dark Eldar embraced them completely. They survived by feeding on the pain and suffering of others, literally stealing the life force from their victims through torture. Vecna smiled his skeletal grin. These were beings he could work with. Using knowledge from the Necron archives, Vecna found a way to detect the Webway's hidden entrances. He located one near a dying star system and slipped inside. The Webway was unlike normal space. It was a tunnel of crystalline walls that shimmered with impossible colors. Time and distance worked differently here. A journey that would take years in normal space could be completed in hours through the Webway. But the Webway was not unguarded. Can you imagine traveling through a maze where the walls themselves could kill you? Within minutes of entering, Vecna sensed he was being followed. Shadow shapes moved along the crystalline walls, keeping pace with him. Then, without warning, they struck. Dark Eldar raiders appeared from hidden portals, riding on anti-gravity skyboards that moved faster than the eye could follow. They wore armor made of sharp edges and cruel angles, designed to look terrifying. Their weapons crackled with dark energy. But what struck Vecna most was their faces. They were beautiful, inhumanly perfect, but their eyes held nothing but cruelty and hunger. What is this thing? One of them hissed in a language that sounded like breaking glass. It stinks of death and old magic. Capture it, another commanded. The homunculi will enjoy taking it apart to see how it works. The Dark Eldar attacked with weapons that shot crystallized poison and nets made of monomolecular wire that could slice through almost anything. But Vecna had fought countless battles in his long existence. He cast Time Stop, freezing half of the raiders in place. With a gesture, he disintegrated their skyboards, sending them falling into the spaces between the Webway tunnels where they would drift forever. The remaining raiders hesitated. They had expected an easy capture. Instead, they had found something that could fight back. Wait, Vecna said, speaking in their own language. His eye of Vecna allowed him to understand all languages just by hearing them once. I didn't come here to fight. I came to make a deal. Would you trust someone who just killed half your friends to make a deal? The raiders laughed, high and cruel. A deal? You have nothing we want, dead thing. We take what we desire. We don't negotiate. Really? Vecna replied. You don't want access to Necron tomb worlds? You don't want technology that could make your weapons 10 times more deadly? You don't want knowledge of Imperial defenses on 1,000 planets ripe for raiding? That made them pause. The Dark Eldar loved new toys, especially if those toys helped them cause more pain and suffering. The leader of the raiders, a tall female with scars she had clearly given herself for decoration, studied Vecna with narrowed eyes. You would betray the lesser races to us? Why? Because I want something in return, Vecna said simply. I want access to Comarak. I want to meet your leaders. And I want to learn how to travel the Webway as you do. The raiders consulted among themselves in quick, hissing whispers. Finally, the leader turned back to Vecna. Very well, Corpse Wizard. We will take you to the Dark City. But if you're lying, if this is a trick, the homunculi will keep you alive and screaming for 1,000 years. They're very good at making sure things don't die no matter how much they want to. I look forward to meeting them, Vecna said, meaning it. He was genuinely curious about beings who had turned torture into an art form. The raiders led Vecna deeper into the webway, through passages that twisted and turned in directions that shouldn't exist. Finally, they emerged into something impossible, an entire city existing in the space between dimensions. Kamarak, the Dark City. Have you ever seen a city built entirely on suffering? Kamarak was massive beyond comprehension. Spires stretched upward into infinity, their tops lost in darkness that no light could penetrate. Chains the size of highways connected the spires, and on these chains hung cages containing victims from 1,000 different species. Screams echoed constantly through the streets. Not screams of fear, but screams of agony as the homunculi practiced their craft. The architecture itself seemed designed to cause psychological pain. Buildings leaned at angles that made you feel sick to look at them. Statues depicted tortures so creative and horrible that even Vecna, who had seen terrible things in his long life, felt impressed. The streets were made of a material that changed texture under your feet, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, always uncomfortable. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were the Dark Eldar themselves. They moved through their city like predators, always hunting for the next source of entertainment. They wore armor decorated with still-living victims flayed and shaped into artwork. They carried weapons that could kill in 1,000 different painful ways. They looked at each other with the same cruelty they showed their captives because in Kamarak, everyone was both hunter and potential prey. The raiders brought Vecna to a massive arena at the city center. Thousands of Dark Eldar filled the seats, watching as various creatures fought and died for their amusement. In one corner, Space Marines fought against each other, their minds broken and reprogrammed to hate their own battle brothers. In another, human slaves were forced to fight with weapons they barely knew how to use. The crowd cheered whenever someone died in a particularly creative way. Waiting in the arena center was a being who radiated power and ancient evil. An Archon, one of the Dark City's rulers. What would you do if you met someone who measured their worth by how much pain they had caused? The Archon was tall and impossibly beautiful, wearing armor made from the bones of his enemies. His face was ageless, kept young by the suffering he fed upon. When he smiled, his teeth were filed to points. So, he said in a voice like poison honey, "You're the thing that killed my raiders and then convinced the survivors to bring you here." Bold. Stupid but bold. I appreciate that. I have a proposition, Vecna began. The Archon held up one elegant hand. Before you speak, let me explain something. We Dark Eldar don't make deals as equals. We take what we want. The only reason you're still, well, alive isn't quite the right word for you, is it? The only reason you still exist is because I'm curious. Entertain me, and maybe I'll let you leave with all your pieces attached. Vecna had dealt with arrogant rulers before. The key was showing value without showing weakness. I can give you something your raiders alone cannot achieve. I can help you strike at heavily defended targets. I know the schedules of entire Imperial fleets. I know where the Craftworld Eldar hide their infinity circuits. I know the locations of Necron tomb worlds that haven't woken yet. Imagine the technology you could steal before they activate their defenses. Do you think knowledge is more valuable than strength? The Archon's eyes glittered with interest. Go on. In exchange, I want 3 things, Vecna continued. First, teach me to navigate the webway. Second, give me access to your homunculi's knowledge of biology and pain. I want to understand how you extend life through suffering. Third, I want to use Kamarak as a base when needed, a place the Imperium and Chaos cannot easily reach. The Archon laughed, and the entire arena laughed with him. You want us to give you our most precious secrets? The webway has been ours for millennia. The homunculi's craft took thousands of years to perfect. And you think we'll just share? I think you'll share because I'm offering you the keys to raiding targets you've only dreamed of, Vecna replied calmly. Imagine attacking the Imperial Palace itself using secret webway routes. I can show you. Imagine stealing gene seed directly from Space Marine chapter monasteries. Imagine capturing Necron cryptechs who know technologies even you haven't mastered. The arena went silent. Every Dark Eldar present was imagining the possibilities. The Archon's smile grew wider. "You're either brilliant or insane," the Archon said. "Possibly both." "Very well, dead wizard. We have a deal. But understand this. The moment you stop being useful, the moment you betray us, I will personally ensure your suffering lasts for eternity. Our homunculi can keep even soulless things like you aware and in agony. We're very creative. I wouldn't expect anything less," Vecna replied. "Now, shall we discuss our first target? Can you trust allies who would torture you the moment you became inconvenient?" Over the following weeks, or what felt like weeks in the timeless webway, Vecna worked with the Dark Eldar. He showed them a poorly defended Imperial world on the edge of known space, a planet rich with psychers who hadn't yet been collected by the Black Ships. The Dark Eldar loved psychers. Their suffering produced especially delicious energy. The raid was brutal and perfectly executed. Dark Eldar raiders poured through webway portals directly into the planet's capital city. They moved so fast the defenders barely had time to react. Skyboards swooped down from the sky, raiders laughing as they snatched victims with grappling hooks. Grotesques, massive flesh monsters created by the homunculi, smashed through defensive walls. Mandrakes, creatures made of living shadow, appeared from darkness to drag screaming victims away. Vecna watched it all with his all-seeing eye, taking notes. He studied how the Dark Eldar coordinated their attacks, how they used fear as a weapon, how they knew exactly when to strike and when to retreat before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. Within hours, they had captured thousands of victims and disappeared back into the webway, leaving behind a planet in shock and terror. The Archon was pleased. "You delivered exactly what you promised. Perhaps you'll survive our partnership after all." As payment, the Dark Eldar gave Vecna what he wanted. Homunculi taught him their secrets of keeping things alive long past when they should have died. They showed him how they reshaped flesh like clay, creating monsters and marvels. They explained how suffering could be harvested and stored, used as fuel for both weapons and longevity. A Trueborn, one of the Dark Eldar nobility who specialized in webway navigation, taught Vecna how to open portals and read the crystalline tunnels patterns. It was part technology, part psychic ability, and completely alien to how Vecna normally worked. But he was a fast learner, and soon he could travel the webway himself. Would you learn the arts of torture if it meant gaining incredible power? But Vecna was always planning ahead. He knew the Dark Eldar would eventually betray him. It was their nature. So he was careful to never tell them everything. He kept the most valuable Necron data for himself. He memorized webway routes the Dark Eldar didn't know he'd discovered. He planted subtle magical trackers on several Archons, so he'd know if they planned to move against him. And most importantly, he was gathering an army. Using his necromantic powers combined with homunculi flesh-crafting knowledge, Vecna began creating servants in secret. He took corpses the Dark Eldar discarded and reanimated them, but these weren't normal undead. They were enhanced with stolen Necron technology and Dark Eldar bioengineering. They were stronger, faster, and absolutely loyal to him alone. After months of working with the Dark Eldar, Vecna had learned everything he needed. He could travel the webway. He understood how to extend his existence by feeding on suffering. He had access to weapons and warriors. He knew the locations of targets throughout the galaxy. It was time for the final phase of his plan. Time to strike at the heart of the Imperium itself. Time to attack Holy Terra and claim the Golden Throne. The Dark Eldar were happy to help with this ultimate raid. After all, what could be more entertaining than watching someone try to kill the God Emperor? Either Vecna would succeed, which would be the most spectacular event in 10,000 years, or he would fail spectacularly, providing wonderful entertainment. Either way, the Dark Eldar would enjoy the show. And Vecna? Vecna was counting on it. Have you ever wondered what it would take to attack the most heavily defended planet in an entire galaxy? Vecna stood in the shadows of Comarak, surrounded by the forces he had gathered for the greatest assault in 10,000 years. Before him stretched an army that would make even the Chaos Gods pause. Thousands of reanimated warriors enhanced with Necron technology, Dark Eldar raiders eager for the ultimate prize, and stolen war machines from a dozen different civilizations. But Vecna knew this wasn't enough. Terra's defenses could stop fleets of millions. He needed something more. He needed allies from the warp itself. Using knowledge he had gained from studying the Chaos Gods, Vecna performed a ritual that would have been impossible in his home universe. He opened his mind to the Imperium, calling out to the demons of chaos. Not the major demons, not the ones who served the four gods directly. Those would never follow him. Instead, he called to the lesser demons, the forgotten ones, the creatures who hungered for a chance to prove themselves. And they answered. Through tears in reality, demons poured into Vecna's hidden sanctuary. Bloodletters seeking skulls for Khorne's throne. Plague-bearers carrying Nurgle's gifts. Demonettes promising pleasure and pain. Pink horrors cackling with Cinch's laughter. Vecna didn't try to control them. That would be impossible. Instead, he offered them a deal. Help him breach Terra's defenses, and they could feast on the psychic energy of billions of humans. The demons agreed, because demons always hungered for more souls. Would you make a deal with literal demons if it meant achieving your greatest ambition? The Archon of the Dark Eldar, Cable, laughed when he saw Vecna's assembled forces. Mad. Absolutely mad. I love it. When do we begin? Now, Vecna said simply. The assault on Holy Terra began not with a frontal attack, but with deception. Vecna had learned the Imperium's communication protocols from captured astropaths during his raids with the Dark Eldar. Using this knowledge, he sent false messages throughout the Segmentum Solar, the region of space containing Terra. He reported massive orc invasions in 3 different systems, a Tyranid hive fleet approaching from the galactic east, and chaos fleets massing near Cadia. The Imperium's defenders did exactly what Vecna predicted. They split their forces to respond to multiple threats. Battle fleets that normally protected Terra were sent to reinforce other systems. Space Marine chapters deployed to meet invasions that didn't exist. The High Lords of Terra argued about which threat was most serious, wasting precious time. Only when Terra's defenses were stretched thin did Vecna strike. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. From the webway, Dark Eldar raiders emerged in the heart of the Imperial Palace itself, appearing from portals that hadn't been used in millennia. From the warp, demons tore through reality wherever the Emperor's psychic light was weakest. And from normal space, Vecna's undead fleet, ships he had raised from ancient wrecks and enhanced with stolen technology, appeared in orbit around Terra. Alarms screamed across the throne world. For the first time in 10,000 years, enemies had breached Terra's inner defenses. Can you imagine the panic when the safest place in the galaxy suddenly becomes a battlefield? The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's golden guardians, responded instantly. These were the greatest warriors humanity had ever created, each one a match for dozens of space marines. They had spent 10 millennia preparing for this exact scenario, an attack on Terra itself. Nothing surprised them. Nothing scared them. They simply fought with perfect precision and absolute loyalty. Captain General Trajan Valoris, leader of the Custodes, saw the situation immediately. This is a coordinated assault. Seal all webway portals. Deploy the Shadow Keepers to contain the warp breaches. All Custodian Guard to defensive positions around the Sanctum Imperialis. The Emperor must be protected at all costs. Golden armored warriors rushed through the palace halls, their guardian spears crackling with power. They met the Dark Eldar raiders in brutal close combat. The Dark Eldar were fast, experienced, and cruel, but the Custodes were unstoppable. Each guardian had trained for centuries. Their weapons could cut through any armor. Their minds were conditioned against fear and pain. The Dark Eldar discovered that raiding Terra was very different from raiding undefended Imperial worlds. Outside the palace, the Imperial Fist Space Marine chapter, who had sworn oaths to defend Terra forever, mobilized their entire garrison. Chapter Master Vornhagen personally led his warriors into battle against the demon hordes pouring from warp rifts. Bolter fire roared through the streets of Terra as Space Marines fought demons in battles that would be sung about for generations. For the Emperor, the Space Marines shouted. For humanity, Terra stands. But Vecna had planned for this resistance. He wasn't trying to conquer Terra, not yet. He was creating chaos and confusion, drawing the defenders away from his true target, the Sanctum Imperialis, the chamber containing the Golden Throne. Would you sacrifice thousands of your servants just to create a distraction? Deep beneath the palace, in tunnels that had been sealed for millennia, Vecna's true strike force moved in silence. These were his most powerful undead warriors, enhanced with the best technology and magic he possessed. Leading them were 3 Necron Lichguard he had somehow convinced, or perhaps forced, to serve him. Their war scythes could phase through armor and shields. Their hyperphase swords could cut through tank armor like paper. They encountered their first serious resistance when they reached the Hall of Heroes, a vast chamber filled with statues of humanity's greatest champions. Custodian Guard emerged from hidden alcoves, having anticipated that enemies might try this route. The battle was fierce and terrible. Custodes and Necrons had never fought each other before. It was a clash between humanity's greatest defenders and the galaxy's most ancient warriors. The Custodes fought perfectly, as they always did, but the Necrons were relentless. When damaged, their living metal bodies repaired themselves. When destroyed completely, their resurrection protocols activated, rebuilding them atom by atom. It was a battle that seemed endless, until Vecna himself joined the fight. The Master of Secrets unleashed spells that twisted reality. Time Stop froze 3 Custodes in place. Disintegrate turned another to dust. Power Word Kill dropped one of the Golden Warriors. Though it took 3 castings, Custodes were incredibly resistant to magic. The hand of Vecna glowed with dark power, channeling energies that made the air itself scream. But the Custodes didn't retreat. They never retreated. Even as their brothers fell, they fought harder, their guardian spears finding gaps in Vecna's magical defenses. One spear thrust came within inches of Vecna's skull. Another shattered several of his rib bones, forcing him to use precious magic to hold himself together. Have you ever fought someone who absolutely refused to give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed? Then something changed. The entire palace shook as if struck by an earthquake. The lights flickered. The air grew heavy with psychic pressure, and every living being on Terra felt it. A presence, vast and terrible and ancient, focusing its attention on the battle. The God Emperor had noticed the attack. Vecna felt the Emperor's psychic might reaching out from the Golden Throne like a tidal wave of golden light. It swept through the palace, burning away demons wherever it touched. The Chaos Forces screamed as they were banished back to the warp. Even the Dark Eldar retreated from the psychic fire, fleeing back into the webway. But Vecna didn't run. He pushed forward, getting closer and closer to the Sanctum Imperialis. He could feel the Emperor's power growing stronger with every step, crushing down on him like the weight of a star. His bones cracked under the pressure. His spells began to fail. The very laws of reality seemed to bend around the Emperor's will. Finally, Vecna reached the massive doors of the Sanctum. Beyond them lay the Golden Throne and the God Emperor himself. 100 Custodes stood between Vecna and those doors, led by Captain General Valoris himself. "You will go no further, abomination," Valoris said, his voice calm despite the desperate battle. "The Emperor is eternal. His will is unbreakable. You are nothing compared to his might." Vecna looked at the Custodian Guard, at their perfect formation, at their unwavering determination. He saw the psychic fire building behind the doors as the Emperor prepared to unleash his full power. He calculated his chances of victory, and he laughed. "You think I came here to win?" Vecna said. "You think I expected to kill your Emperor today? No, this was never about victory. This was about sending a message. What message could possibly be worth attacking the most powerful empire in the galaxy? I wanted everyone to know, Vecna continued, that Terra can be reached, that the Golden Throne is not invulnerable, that the God Emperor, for all his power, cannot protect his people from everything. I wanted the Imperium to feel fear for the first time in 10,000 years. And I wanted the Emperor to know that I exist, that I'm coming for his throne. Not today, perhaps, but someday. Vecna raised his skeletal hand, and purple energy swirled around him. A teleportation spell, prepared long before the battle began. But before he vanished, he did one more thing. He planted a magical seed deep in the palace's foundations, a tiny fragment of his power, so small that even the Emperor's psychic senses might not detect it immediately. That seed would wait. It would watch. It would learn. And when the time was right, it would open a door for Vecna to return. The Lich Lord disappeared just as the sanctum doors opened and golden light flooded the hall. The custodes rushed forward, but Vecna was gone, escaped through the webway using routes the Dark Eldar had shown him. Captain General Valoris stared at the spot where Vecna had stood, his expression unreadable behind his golden helm. Increase security throughout the palace. Scan every level for magical contamination. And send word to the High Lords. We have a new threat to monitor. One that knows our defenses and isn't afraid to test them. Can you imagine being responsible for defending an entire world after someone just proved your defenses had weaknesses? Across Terra, the battles ended. The demons were banished. The Dark Eldar retreated. The undead forces crumbled without Vecna's power to sustain them. The Imperium declared victory. After all, Terra still stood and the Emperor was safe. But everyone who had fought in the battle knew the truth. Something new had entered their galaxy. Something that combined magic, technology, and cunning in ways they had never encountered before. Something that had studied them, learned their weaknesses, and struck at their most sacred world. Vecna's message had been received loud and clear. The Imperium was not as safe as it thought. And somewhere in the webway, traveling through the crystalline passages between dimensions, Vecna smiled his skeletal smile. The first phase of his plan was complete. He had tested Terra's defenses and found their limits. He had proven he could strike anywhere in the galaxy. He had made both the Imperium and the Chaos Gods take him seriously. Now came the hard part, surviving the response. Because after attacking Terra, every faction in the galaxy would be hunting him. The Imperium would send its greatest heroes. The Chaos Gods would try to corrupt or destroy him. The Necrons would seek revenge for his theft. Even the Dark Eldar might turn on him if they saw profit in betrayal. The final war was about to begin, and Vecna couldn't wait. What happens when the ultimate schemer finally realizes that some games cannot be won? Vecna had made a terrible mistake, and he knew at the moment he escaped from Terra. He had thought attacking the throne world would establish his power, force the galaxy to take him seriously, and put him in a position to eventually claim the Golden Throne for himself. Instead, he had done something far more dangerous. He had united his enemies. Within days of the assault on Terra, the Imperium issued the highest level of threat declaration. Inquisitors from every Ordo were assigned to hunt Vecna. Space Marine chapters pledged warriors to the search. The Adeptus Mechanicus deployed their most advanced tracking technology. Even the Secretive Officio Assassinorum sent their deadliest killers. Culexus assassins who could kill with a thought, Everzer assassins who were living weapons of pure rage, and Calidus assassins who could appear as anyone, anywhere. But that was just the beginning of Vecna's problems. The Chaos Gods, who had been amused by Vecna's schemes, now saw him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Cinch was particularly annoyed. Vecna's plans were disrupting the great game, introducing variables that even the architect of fate hadn't fully predicted. The four gods did something they rarely did. They agreed to work together, at least temporarily, to deal with this upstart mortal who dared to act independently. Demon princes, champions of chaos blessed with godlike power, received visions showing them where Vecna hid. Chaos Space Marine war bands, traitors who had turned against the Imperium 10,000 years ago, united under a single banner for the first time in millennia. Their goal was simple: find Vecna and make an example of him. Can you imagine being hunted by both the forces of order and the forces of chaos at the same time? The Necrons were equally furious. Vecna had violated their tomb worlds, stolen their sacred technology, and worst of all, he had used their own warriors against them during the Terror Assault. Necron overlords who had been content to sleep for another few millennia woke early, their only thought vengeance. They deployed death marks, Necron assassins who could step through dimensions and kill targets across time itself. They activated pylons, ancient machines that could suppress all magical and psychic power in entire star systems. Even the Dark Eldar turned against him. The Archon who had allied with Vecna decided that the heat Vecna had brought down on everyone was bad for business. The Dark Eldar survived by being impossible to find, by striking quickly and disappearing before anyone could retaliate. Vecna had made them visible, made them targets. For that, he had to die. The Cable sent their most skilled warriors, incubi, blade masters who had spent centuries perfecting the art of murder, SSLYTH, alien mercenaries whose four arms could wield multiple weapons simultaneously, and worst of all, mandrakes, shadow demons who could appear anywhere darkness existed. Vecna found himself alone, truly alone, for the first time since arriving in the Warhammer 40K universe. All his allies had become enemies. All his careful plans were falling apart. The magical seed he had planted in the Imperial Palace had been found and destroyed by a Grey Knight librarian before it could grow. His hidden bases were being discovered one by one. His undead armies were being hunted down and obliterated. He was losing. Have you ever worked toward a goal for so long, only to realize that goal was impossible from the start? Vecna retreated deep into the webway, to a forgotten section that even the Dark Eldar rarely visited. He needed time to think, to plan, to find a way out of this impossible situation. But the webway itself seemed to be turning against him. The crystalline walls whispered with voices that sounded like Sench's laughter. Shadows moved in ways that suggested mandrakes were closing in. Even the paths themselves seemed to shift, leading him in circles. Then they found him. The attack came from all sides at once, perfectly coordinated despite the fact that the attackers hated each other almost as much as they hated Vecna. A squad of Grey Knights, space marines specially trained to fight demons and magical threats, breached the webway from a warp portal. Their nemesis force weapons crackled with psychic energy specifically designed to permanently kill beings like Vecna. From another direction came a chaos war band, led by a sorcerer of Sench, wielding magic that could rival Vecna's own. Demons poured through tears in reality, surrounding Vecna with creatures that couldn't truly die as long as the Chaos Gods existed. Necron death marks phased into existence, their synaptic disintegrators locked onto Vecna's form. These weapons didn't just kill, they erased targets from reality itself, removing them from the timeline so they had never existed at all. And from the shadows came Dark Eldar raiders, moving so fast they were almost invisible, their weapons dripping with poisons that could kill gods. It was a trap designed by multiple factions working together, something that should have been impossible in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. But Vecna had done the impossible. He had made enemies so angry they overcame their mutual hatred just to destroy him. What would you do if you faced certain death from every direction at once? Vecna fought with everything he had. Spells that had destroyed armies flew from his skeletal fingers. The hand of Vecna unleashed powers that tore holes in reality. The eye of Vecna saw his enemies' weaknesses and exploited them mercilessly. He killed Grey Knights with power word kill. He bound demons with ancient rituals. He shattered Necron warriors with disintegration beams. He poisoned Dark Eldar with their own toxins turned back upon them. But for every enemy he destroyed, 10 more appeared. The Grey Knights were relentless, their faith in the Emperor making them immune to fear. The Chaos forces simply reformed in the warp and returned to battle. The Necrons rebuilt themselves with living metal. The Dark Eldar were replaced by fresh warriors eager for the kill. Vecna was immortal, yes. Powerful, yes. Cunning, absolutely. But he was one being against an entire galaxy, and that galaxy had decided he needed to die. As he fought, something strange happened. Vecna began to understand the fundamental truth of Warhammer 40K. The truth that the Emperor had learned 10,000 years ago, that the Chaos Gods had known forever, that every faction in the galaxy lived with every single day. There are no winners in the grim darkness of the far future. There is only war. The Emperor had won his crusade to unite humanity, only to be betrayed and trapped on a throne, suffering forever. The Chaos Gods were eternal, yes, but they were locked in an infinite struggle with each other and their enemies, never truly achieving victory. The Necrons had defeated the Tan, only to lose their souls in sleep for millions of years. The Eldar had created an empire of wonder, only to birth a god through their own excesses and watch their civilization fall. Everyone loses eventually. Everyone suffers. Everyone pays the price of ambition. Can you accept that some battles cannot be won, only survived? A Grey Knight's sword pierced Vecna's chest, the blessed weapon burning with holy fire. A demon's claw tore off his arm. The hand of Vecna, his greatest artifact, gone. A Necron's disintegrator beam struck his skull, destroying the eye of Vecna in a flash of green light. Dark Eldar blades cut through his spine, severing his connection to his own undead body. Vecna was dying. For real this time. Even his immortality couldn't save him from this much damage, from this many different types of attacks happening simultaneously. His consciousness began to fade, darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. But in that moment of defeat, Vecna had a choice. He could fight to the absolute end, taking as many enemies with him as possible, achieving nothing but a memorable death. He could try one last desperate spell, perhaps escaping, but leaving himself broken and powerless. Or he could do something he had never done in thousands of years of existence. He could accept defeat and learn from it. Using the last of his power, Vecna cast a spell he had prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. A dimensional anchor that would pull him back to his home universe, to the world of Dungeons and Dragons where he belonged. It would cost him everything he had gained in Warhammer 40K. All the knowledge, all the technology, all the power. He would return to his own realm diminished, weakened, but alive. As the spell activated and reality began to tear open around him, Vecna looked at his enemies one final time. The Grey Knights, standing resolute in their faith. The Chaos Forces, laughing at his failure. The Necrons, emotionless in their hatred. The Dark Eldar, disappointed that his suffering was ending so quickly. You think you've won? Vecna whispered with his dying breath. You've won nothing. This galaxy is a tomb. A beautiful, terrible tomb where everyone dies slowly, where hope is a lie, where even gods suffer without end. I came here thinking I could conquer it. I was wrong. This darkness cannot be conquered. It can only consume. What lesson would you take from ultimate defeat? The dimensional rift opened fully, pulling Vecna through. The last thing he saw was the shocked faces of his enemies as they realized their prey was escaping. They rushed forward, trying to follow through the portal, but it was too late. The rift sealed behind Vecna, depositing him back in his own universe. He collapsed in his ancient phylactery chamber, his body broken, his artifacts destroyed, his power nearly gone. But he was alive, and more importantly, he had learned something valuable. Some universes are too dark even for the Master of Secrets. In Warhammer 40K, the factions that had united to destroy Vecna quickly turned on each other again. The Grey Knights fought the Chaos Forces. The Necrons attacked the Dark Eldar. The momentary alliance shattered as quickly as it had formed, because that's what always happened in the 41st millennium. Nothing changed. The Imperium continued to slowly crumble. The Chaos Gods continued their eternal game. The Necrons continued to wake from their long sleep. The galaxy continued its slow march toward oblivion. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. No matter how clever you are, no matter how powerful you become, the darkness always wins in the end. And perhaps that's the real answer to the question, what if Vecna challenged the grim darkness of Warhammer 40K? He would lose. Not because he wasn't strong enough or smart enough, but because Warhammer 40K isn't a place where anyone wins. It's a place where even gods are trapped in eternal suffering, where hope is the cruelest joke of all, where the best you can hope for is to survive one more day in a galaxy that wants you dead. Have you learned that sometimes the wisest choice is knowing when to walk away? Back in his own universe, Vecna eventually recovered his strength. He rebuilt his power, recreated his artifacts, and returned to his schemes of conquest. But he never spoke of his time in Warhammer 40K. Some experiences are too dark to share, even for the Whispered One. And on the rarest of nights, when Vecna looked up at the stars in his own sky, he wondered if somewhere out there in the infinite multiverse, the grim darkness was still grinding on, still consuming everyone who entered it, still proving that some challenges aren't meant to be overcome. Some darkness is eternal. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how it should be.